All right, there we go. Cool. So here's our new California Residential Purchase Agreement, joint escrow instructions, car form RPA, December 2021. Again, it'll come out prior to the end of the year. The logo hasn't changed, so that's a good, nice, easy one to remember, right? And then obviously at the top, we have our date prepared. This is the day you're writing the offer. So that's an easy thing to remember. And then this is an offer from, right? We have our buyer's name, we have the property, all the same. We do have assessor's parcel number here, and they did add a point in bold here. It says postal/mailing address may be different from city jurisdiction. Buyers advised to investigate. What does that mean? Well, the actual address on the outside of the house may be different from the description of the property on the APN, right? Sometimes you have, fourplexes where each property has its own individual address, but the post office uses the same address with different unit numbers, right? So we've seen that before. Certainly that's something that they wanted to kind of talk about here, so that the buyer's advised to go and take a look and investigate that. We have the terms below, and then right at the top here in paragraph D, which I love, they added that the buyer and seller are referred to as parties. Brokers and agents are not parties to the agreement. Okay, what does that mean? It means we're not buying the house or selling the house, right? We're earning an income, but we have no financial interest in the piece of real estate we're discussing here, okay? Paragraph 2 is our agency, which this paragraph did exist. There are some slight changes. There's a paragraph here that says, or a sentence here that says, buyer's agent is not legally required to give seller's agent the agency disclosure form. Okay, there was kind of a misperception that we needed to provide agencies to the other parties. And I've heard instances where a selling agent will demand from the listing agent or vice versa their agency disclosure, but this says we're not required to provide that. Okay. And then we have our confirmation, right? We know that agency basically happens in a couple of different ways. One is giving the AD form, the agency disclosure form, which is not attached to the sample here yet. They're revising it. This is just the RPA. It's still going to come with all the other documents that come with our current contracts, the agency, the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, the fair housing and discrimination advisory, the wire fraud advisory, the consumer, the consumer protection notice for data, and the buyer inspection advisory. So all those will still come with the RPA, but this is just the RPA, okay? But again, agency talks about first giving an agency disclosure, which would happen at the time of the listing or at the latest at the time of the purchase agreement. For your buyers, you should probably be getting them an agency disclosure right when you start working with them. And then part 2 of agency is confirmation, right? Who is being represented. And then part 3 of agency is giving the PRBS form, the possible representation of buyer and seller. Okay, so agency disclosure happens in those 3 parts. This is part 2, the confirmation. They did add here that if the seller's brokerage, it was representing both the buyer and seller, they added that it's called a dual agent, right? That wasn't on there before. And that could be for the seller's agent, buyer's agent. And then a couple of other things here. Paragraph C in agency. If checked, more than one brokerage represents the seller or the buyer. So if you have a co-listing agreement or you have 2 different brokerages representing the buyer, there's now a checkbox right in the paragraph for that to add the ABA, the additional broker acknowledgement form. Okay, so co-listing or co-buying agencies, brokerages, this paragraph has been added so that you can incorporate the appropriate form. And then D, potentially competing buyers and sellers, the PRBS, that's the 3rd part of agency. So that document is attached and it's pre-checked that it's attached. Okay.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
I believe Lenton is trying to get a hold of you.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Nick?
I can.
Okay, I have a question about that agency. Is there a form? You always say that if there's a problem, there's a form for it. Is there a form for a seller where the seller can demand to know the representation of the buying agent? What's the representation is?
The seller would see that right here on the purchase agreement, right? So once the buyer makes an offer, they'll see who, at what brokerages and what agents are representing who.
Yeah, I'm talking about the agency relationship. You said that it's on there somewhere where the agent, the agency relationship does not have to be disclosed to the seller.
It just says that we're not required to give the form that we have, the AD
Well,
form.
Yeah,
So-
how would you know there's the representation you trust? You'd have to trust the buyer's agent.
I mean, you would see it on the offer. If the buyer submits an offer, then you're going to see it right here.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
You got it.
Thanks.
You
Appreciate
got it. No problem. Okay. And then we get to paragraph 3, what I lovingly call the matrix. This is the 1, 2, 3 pages of additional new paragraph that basically what it's done here is it's taken like all the major terms and costs and put them right in the same place, right? So instead of having to go to, whatever, paragraph 14 to find out how long the buyer's investigation contingency is, or how long the seller has to deliver disclosures, or how long a demand to close and a notice to perform and all that stuff. So it's all here now. And we're going to go through and take a look at what we got. So another cool thing with this little matrix here, 3 is the paragraph. A, the letters are the sub paragraphs, right? 3A, 3D, 1, D2, etc. And then in here it says paragraph number. And these numbers refer to the paragraphs later in the contract, essentially that explain in more detail what these issues are. So if we're talking about contingencies and it says, buyer has so many days to do their investigation, it'll reference a paragraph later in the contract so you can see a little bit more about what are the buyer's investigation rights, what are the seller's responsibilities to disclose, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual terms, timeframes, et cetera, are all right here. The explanations will be a little farther. And as we go forward and get past paragraph 3, you'll see a little bit more about what that actually means, okay? So let's start digging in. 3A, purchase price. Got it. We got a number, and then we have terms, right? Is it all cash or not? And then we have close of escrow, number of days or a date. They put number of days first because that's more common throughout the state. It's a little bit of a change. 3C, expiration of offer, right? 3 calendar days after buyer signatures. There are new definitions in here too, by the way. There's days, there's calendar days, and then there are business days. And we'll explain what all those mean when we get to the definition section, okay? So expiration is there. It's defaulted to 3 calendar days. 3D1, we have our initial deposit. We can put a dollar amount, or what they've done, they've added a percentage. Many people will put 3% of the price. So we can just type in 3%. And then how long does it take for deposit to get into escrow? It's the same, 3 business days. Okay, 3 business days after the acceptance. Now look, they defaulted here that it's by wire transfer. Okay, the previous one said electronic funds, and then it had a bunch of options for a cashier's check, personal check, or other. 99.9% of the time these days, you're using a wire transfer. So that's the default. And if you're changing it to something else, you can check the box. Okay. Next, D2, 3D2, increased deposit. This would be additional monies that are going into escrow after you put in your initial deposit. We don't almost ever use this, but if you did need to remove or add more money into escrow, this is where you would do that. And then it also says to add an additional form, basically that covers liquidated damages. And it gives a time frame of when to put the additional money in. The default is upon removal of all contingencies, or a date or something else, a number of days probably, okay? All right, 3E1, we have our loan amount, okay? And we have the dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price, which is nice, right? So when we put a 20% down, it would be 80% of the price. And I know when I teach how to write an offer, agents always get confused because they're trying to figure out the down payment and write that somewhere on the form, on the purchase agreements. It doesn't ask for the down payment anywhere. It asks for the loan amount, right? And so that's where we can put in that dollar amount or the percentage. Default is fixed. There is an option for adjustable. There are points, right? 0 points. So the default is there are no points being paid, or a percentage if there are. And then there is another part here. If it's FHA or VA, how long do we have to deliver the list of lender required repairs? 17 days. Okay, this was buried in the contract previously on like page 6. Okay, now it's right up front. How long does the buyer have to ask for any sort of lender required repairs? The default previously was 17, it's still 17. We also have here that the loan default is conventional, or if checked, FHA, VA, seller financing, or other. There used to be assumed financing, which essentially just does not happen at all in California or across the country. So they took it off. They removed it because it's not something that's very common. Okay. 3E2, additional financing. This would be if you had a second loan of some sort, you would put in those terms. And the default again is conventional, and there's some information about whether points are being paid, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. We have 3E3. This is new in a sense. There was a paragraph that addressed this, but it says, who is occupying the property? Is it a primary residence? Is it a secondary, a second home, or is it an investment property? Previously, the contract asked, what did it ask? It said buyer intends or does not intend to occupy the property. Okay. Now we have it a little bit more clear about who is going to be occupying. Then we have our balance, which in the old RPA auto calculates. I'm assuming this one will as well. And then we have our total price, right? That will be automatically calculated as well, because the price will be here. And then we have the price reiterated down here. So basically the first part of paragraph 3 is how is the property being paid for? Okay, and it's all right in the same place, easy. And that's pretty much how it is on the other RPA, the current RPA. It just didn't have this occupancy type. All right, let's keep going. So now we get into the G's. 3G. Look at this. They added a paragraph here for if there is a seller credit to the buyer. Previously, we would have to type in if the buyer is going to ask the seller to pay for any credits. They've added a paragraph for that. And then we have a dollar amount or a percentage. And then we have the default here that says the seller credit is to be applied to closing costs. Okay, so that's nice. We don't have to like think of the verbiage or what to write. You know, it's done here for us. Okay. G2 is additional financing terms. So anything else related to the funds would be right here. H, verification of all cash. If it's cash, the funds are attached to the offer. If there's a loan and there's down payment and closing costs, it's attached to the offer. That's the default. Okay. Or you can change it to a few days afterwards, which the current RPA says that the buyer would give the pre-approval letter and proof of funds 3 days after opening escrow. So they swapped the default to where all the documents and proof are delivered with the contract. Okay, which includes, again, loan application. Here's something else they added. It's attached, and then it's asking what kind of lender letter is it? Is it a pre-qual, a pre-approval, or is it a fully underwritten pre-approval, right? Which some banks do. Now, I will say there is no formal definition for these 3 types of approvals. Okay, that is not a regulated name, but I think we kind of all know pre-qual is essentially like a phone call without verification. Pre-approval would be, you know, a full loan app submitted with the supporting docs, and underwritten pre-approval means the underwriter has actually verified and approved the loan subject to a property and an appraisal, right? So that's that. And then we have paragraph I, which is intentionally left blank, right? Why is it intentionally left blank? Well, I found out because they were concerned that the I can be confused with a number 1, and then we got our paragraphs all messed up, right? So they just said, we're just going to leave that out and not cause any confusion. Okay, time frames we're going to get into a little bit more. Final verification of contingent condition. That's our final walkthrough, right? It's still 5 days prior to close. Again, this was buried in the contract previously. Assignment request, another great one. This would be if the buyer is going to assign the contract to another buyer, which we do see happen from time to time. And remember, the seller has to reasonably approve any sort of assignment request, and any sort of fee that the assignor is receiving needs to be disclosed to the seller. Well, they've added that also this has to happen within a certain amount of time. It has to happen within 17 days or whatever you end up putting into the contract. Okay, so that is also new here for assignments. And then we get to all of our contingencies, right? And again, it's just spelled out right here. We have our loan contingency, 17 days after acceptance or none. We have our appraisal contingency, which is 17 days or no appraisal contingency. Now, a couple things they've added. Appraisal contingency based upon appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price or another amount. So maybe you're overbidding, but you're saying, yeah, your property is listed for $750. Well, I'll buy it for $8. But if it doesn't appraise, I'll pay at least $775. We'll still pay over asking, right? So that would almost be like if we were writing an offer where we said, you know, buyer will pay $25K above the highest appraised value, not to exceed blank. That would be kind of a different iteration of this. So we'll see if this verbiage makes it all the way through, but this does give you an option to have a minimum if it doesn't appraise, which could be different than the purchase price. Okay. Also, for contingencies, they've added this paragraph. Removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in the FVAC. What does that mean? Well, remember, FHA and VA cannot waive their appraisal contingency. Federal law says, even if they write in here no appraisal contingency and it doesn't appraise, they still are not obligated to buy the property. They still retain their cancellation rights, and you can get your money back. Okay, the buyers can for FHA and VA. All right. So Adam, I want to see how this all plays out. So I'm not quite ready to answer that, but I would stick to our current verbiage right now. Okay. B, yes, that's me. Hi, nice to see you. You have a question? You want to unmute yourself? Even if you put $1 above.
Wait, I'm sorry, I can't figure out this unmute thing. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, so even if you put a $5,000 above appraisal here on 8B, this here will still be the removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal for FHA and VA. That still would be protect the buyer.
So two different things, right? And it's actually paragraph L2.
Yeah.
Remember, this column is referencing later in the contract. But,
oh yeah, you're right.
so there's two things. This one over here just says FHA and VA always retain cancellation rights, even if they write in here no appraisal contingency. That's a federal law. So can they waive the appraisal? Well, they can write in that they're waiving it, but they're still protected federally to cancel and get their money back. This part over here, they're basically saying that we can offer a price and it's contingent on appraising at that price. But we can also say, instead of it contingent on that price, we can be a different amount. So again, the example is listed $750. We make an offer for $800K. And it says here it's contingent on appraising at $800K. Or we could put our minimum and say, we'll offer $800, but if it doesn't appraise, we'll make it that it has to appraise it. No, it has to at least appraise for $775, right? So it is a new binding term that would adjust the price if the appraisal came in at a different number. Okay, I think this can probably be rewritten better, and I suspect before this comes out completely in December, this language will be adjusted a little bit.
Right. So that was my question. So if you put an amount there, and let's say it doesn't appraise, it appraises at $750. You can still withdraw the offer. It still protects your buyer.
Yep. Basically,
right?
Whatever number you put in here, if it comes in below this number or the actual purchase price, there's still a cancellation right based on the appraisal.
Okay, okay, I get it.
Okay, cool.
Hey,
Again,
Nick, real quick question.
a little confusing, so I know we're gonna probably see some clarity around that. Yes.
Right.
What about for the protection of, it says 17 days. What about if you minimize the days on there? Will it still, is there a minimum for the FHA and VA that they're still protected?
FHA and VA are protected no matter what.
It's still, so it'll be automatic 17 days.
Yeah, I believe that even if the appraisal comes in on day 30 and it's late for whatever reason, they could still walk. Okay, so obviously we're going to
Okay.
be really
Thank you.
diligent in making sure we get our appraisals done ASAP. And I'm seeing language in contracts that says lender must order appraisal, within 3 days of opening escrow. So, keep that in mind. Okay, let's keep going. So we did a loan, we did appraisal. Now we're on L3, investigation of property. We have our 17 days. Now here's something that they've added. This was a version of this was written in the other contract as well, the current contract. It says informational access to property. What does that mean? Well, in the agreement, RPA currently, there's a section there that says the seller must make the property available to the buyer for X amount of days. Right now it's 17 days. So now they're putting this right on page, right up front in the paragraph 3 to look at all the terms. And it just says that the buyer has the right to do any sort of informational access to the property, even after they've removed their contingencies, right? So let's say the investigation of the property was shortened to like 5 days. You can do your investigations, meaning your physical inspection, plumbing, electric, do all the inspections you want. But maybe they're going to let you have additional time to just go into the property for your personal knowledge, to measure for furniture, take a look and, tape it off or whatever they want to do, right? So it's two different things. One is to do your investigations, which is a contingency. One is informational access and how long the seller is going to give the buyer to be in the property for any other information. That is not a contingency. Okay, so there's a slight difference between the two. Again, just as this is just telling the buyer how long the seller is going to give them to access the property. All right. Next, we have a few things. Review of seller's documents, review of the prelim, review of the common interest disclosures, okay, review of leased or liened items, solar panel, propane, PACE, Hero. All of these are 17 days, or they've added this, 5 days after receipt, whichever is later, okay? If you recall, in the current contract, it says 17 days, and then there's a paragraph that says if you receive documents after the contingency period, then you have additional time to review. So now it's spelled out pretty clearly, 5 days after receipt or 17 days, whichever one of those is later, okay? And then on the right, removal or waiver of contingency. Any of these may be removed by checking the appropriate box on the CR, right? And then we have a box here to click and attach the CR. So if you're making an offer without some of these disclosures, you can remove them up front. You just have to provide the CR form with your offer that shows that you're removing them, okay? All right. L8, sale of buyer's property. So we still have the COP form. If it is going to be contingent on the buyer selling a property, they check the box. COP will automatically get added. And then we move into the M's, where we talk about possession. So time of possession, the time that the keys are delivered to the buyer are either upon notice of recordation. So when we get confirmation that the grant deed is recorded with the county, the buyer can get the keys. So sometimes that happens before 6. Sometimes it happens first thing in the morning, right? Depends on when title is, what the order of the title companies are for the day at the recorder. Or we can change the time, right? And then on the date specified as applicable, okay? So typically that would be the day of recording, right? Notice of recordation would be when we are delivering keys, okay? Now we know that there's other options here for seller occupied or vacant units. There may be a different date, right? And it says here, close of escrow is the default, like we said. or 29 days or less, 30 days or more, and that'll automatically attach either the SIP or the RLAS. Okay, pretty much just like what we have right now, although it's just a little bit more clear now. It's a little bit more easy to see and read, right? And with your offer, you're going to incorporate these documents with your purchase agreement. I've seen this happen frequently recently, where a buyer makes an offer and the seller, the listing agent and the seller come back and say it's contingent on or its possession will be, later down the road, 10 days, 20 days, whatever it is, but we don't use the appropriate document. And then at the end of escrow, when people are upset over something that didn't happen right in the deal, now people are trying to ask for rent back and monies or not pay money. If you don't figure that out up front, you're trying to renegotiate a deal where there is no clarity. So that's why they're adding it. You need to add it right with your offers. Okay. Tenant occupied units. They have updated a new form called the TOP, tenant occupancy addendum, purchase agreement addendum. So there's a new document. There is a TIP right now, tenant in possession. So that is a form that we have not seen yet. It's not out yet. Okay, so we will see that shortly, I'm sure. All right. Document fees and compliance. So now we have paragraph N. How long does the seller have to deliver their documents? 7 days. How long does everybody have to sign and return the escrow holder provisions and supplemental instructions? 5 days. Okay, this is in the purchase agreement, oftentimes missed, but the buyer and seller have 5 days to deliver their escrow instructions upon receipt. How long to pay for fees to order HOA documents? 3 days. Now here's a new one. Install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, and water heater bracing. 7 days after acceptance, all this needs to be done for compliance. Right now, it just says that the seller has to install smoke alarms and carbon monoxide and do the water heater bracing, but it doesn't really say by when. It basically says all repairs need to be done 5 days before the final walkthrough, basically. Well, now we have a new paragraph that says this stuff has to be done within a week. Why? To make sure it's ready for the appraisal, right? We want to make sure that the appraiser is going to be able to go out there and verify this stuff. So that is new. All right. Now we get to P. Items included and excluded from the sale. Now, I love this because they have updated a few things. First of all, it says all items specified in paragraph 9B are included and the following if checked. Okay, so this does not cover everything. We would have to go down, right, to paragraph 9, which currently is paragraph 7, I believe, in our current RPA. And it shows all the stuff included in the sale, right? All this is included, basically. Okay. But what they've done is they've added a few things that are a little bit more current. Okay. So they've talked about, we know the stove, the refrigerator, but look, they've added things like a wine refrigerator, washer, dryer, dishwasher, microwave. Look, video doorbells. Okay. I've seen that come up numerous times. Is my Ring camera included in the sale or not? Well, now you can check it off. Security camera equipment, security systems and alarms other than video doorbell and camera equipment, smart home control devices, wall-mounted brackets for video or audio equipment, speakers, TVs, etc. The above ground pool or a spa if checked or not, right? The bathroom mirrors, which could be like the vanity unless excluded. Look, they've added electric car charging systems and stations. And then they've added potted trees and shrubs, probably because people just assume that if there's big potted plants outside, they're included, but they're not, right? That's personal property. So now you got to add that if you want to keep it. All right. There is a section here for excluded items as well. So if you know the seller is not or is excluding something and you want to write it in, you can write it in. Okay, Q, allocation of costs. So we have our NHD, right? Who's paying for it? Buyer, seller, or there's a new section here to check both. Okay, And if both is checked, it says up here that the cost is to be split equally unless otherwise agreed. That's right up here, okay? I don't know why I can't highlight that, but who pays, right? So there's a both section and additional terms, environmental, other, and then who is going to provide the NHT. We have two sections for other reports. So obviously something like a termite might go in here. Now we have, remember we just looked and saw that the seller has to do the smoke detector, CO2, carbon monoxide, and water heater. It's not the seller. It's actually negotiable. Okay. In the current contract, I believe it does say the seller must be in compliance. So here's the way this paragraph works. The seller is still responsible to be compliant, but it's negotiable who pays for it. Right. So in a hot market like this, the buyer may say, hey, I'll put all that stuff in. Don't you worry about it. Seller, it's still the seller's responsibility, but either party can pay for it now. Q5 and 6, right? We get this all the time. Government required point of sale inspections and reports. This is a little bit more clear now. The current contract says government mandatory inspections or investigations, and then it says mandatory retrofit. Okay, so now we have a little more clarity. It says point of sale inspections and reports, point of sale corrective and remedial actions. So this would be our city reports and any sort of city work that is noted to be required, if any. And then again, who's going to pay for it? Buyer, seller, or both. You can split it 50-50 or another way. You can split it any way you want. Okay, you just have to put it in writing. The default is equal. Q7, we have our escrow fees like we have now. Look, buyer, seller, both, or they've added each to pay their own fees, right? So we always are writing that in. Now you just get to check the box. Your escrow company is right here. Owner's title, buyer, seller, or both. Title company, if different from the escrow holder, we could type that in. Buyer's lender title insurance policy. The default is that the buyer is going to pay for this, because it's a lender requirement, not the seller requirement. We have in here county tax, city tax, and transfer fees, buyer, seller, or both. We have who's paying for the HOA disclosures. Default is the seller is paying for that, which is common. HOA certification fee, the default is the buyer's paying for that because that's a lender required issue, right? They want the cert. Who's paying transfer fees by the HOA, if anybody? Buyer, seller, or both. Okay. Let's see here. And then there's a little clarity around this too. Unless otherwise agreed, seller shall pay for a separate HOA move out fee, and buyer shall pay for a separate move in fee. So sometimes the HOAs designate certain fees per party, buyer or seller. So this is saying if it's a move out fee, the seller's paying for it. If it's a move in fee, the buyer's paying for it. Okay, let's see, private transfer fees, seller, or if checked, buyer, or both. And then we have other fees and costs here. We have our home warranty, who's paying for it, how much is it gonna be, who's gonna issue it, pretty similar to what we have here now. And then we have paragraph R, which is the other terms and condition, which is previously paragraph 6 in the current RPA. All right. Wow, that was a mouthful. Does anyone have any questions about paragraph number 3, which is substantial? We all good? You guys tell me. Does this look a little easier or a little harder? What do you guys think?
It's definitely easier. It's just going to take a little bit longer to review for buyers and sellers. But it definitely brings a lot of clarity, especially the escrow one. A lot of people don't realize the difference between 50-50 and each to pay their own.
Right.
So that makes that very clear.
Yep. I love it. I love it.
I agree.
Yeah. I think it's pretty well organized generally. I mean, there's a lot of clarity and it's all in the same place, right? So we don't have to go digging to find, timeframes and fees and costs that sometimes are in different places in the contract. So I think it'll be a lot easier for your clients to review it as well. So cool. Let's see here. So that is that ended on page number 3. Look at that. We got only 13 more to go. So yes, we are now at 16 pages for the RPA. Currently, it is 10, okay? Not including all the extra docs. So I'm gonna keep going for maybe another 10 minutes. Obviously, I didn't plan on getting through all of this today, but we will keep going, okay? So paragraph 4, property addenda and advisory. So this is currently in the purchase agreement where we can add addendums. Well, here's something new. All these documents currently have their own purchase agreements. There's a probate purchase agreement, a manufactured home purchase agreement. Those two now are only going to be addendums to the current purchase agreement. So those two forms will be no longer available. The probate and the manufactured home are going to be gone. We're only going to use an addendum now for those two types of sales. We have the tenant occupied property addenda, the TOPA that we saw earlier. If the tenant's staying in the property, we'll check that box. And then we have two other addendums, tenant in common purchase agreements, which I've seen a few of those up in LA, and then stock co-op purchase agreement addendums. So there's two new addendums for those types of properties, which I know here in my city of Long Beach, we do have a lot of co-ops, okay? All right, and then we have other addenda subject to, so the agreement is subject to the terms contained in the addenda checked below. And guys, just as a reminder, addendums are to add documents or information to a contract prior to acceptance. Amendments are to adjust terms after acceptance. So if you're changing the price on a deal in escrow, you would use an amendment. If you're creating any sort of adjustments or changes to what's in the default contract here, you're going to use addendums, okay? So if I'm going to have a blank addendum, I'll check this box and add number 1. If I'm going to have my backup offer addendum, I'm going to add that. I have my septic, well, property monument, propane addendum, which we don't deal with a ton, but we do certainly get deals that have septic tanks and propane and things like that. So the addendum would be attached. We have the short sale addendum. We have the court confirmation addendum. But look at this, they've added here, buyer or seller intent to exchange addendum. So that wasn't on the contract previously. So if this is subject to a 1031, we can click and add those addendums right now. I'm sure just like Zip Forms works now, you check the box and they will automatically add those documents for your Zip Form transaction. And then buyer and seller advisories. All advisories below are provided for reference purposes only and are not intended to be incorporated into this agreement. All that means is advisories are somebody telling somebody something, but they're not terms to a contract. Okay, so like the wire fraud advisory is saying, hey, make sure you call your escrow company and confirm before you send money off, right? Actually, the attorney that taught this class to me said that he had just seen a deal where there was a $4 million cash purchase and the buyer was wiring in the remainder of his $2.4 million in cash to close the deal and didn't call escrow to verify the information. And guess what? He got hacked. The money went offshore to a criminal and there goes 2.4 million bucks. Ouch. Okay, so make sure you guys are having your clients call to verify. But it's just giving advice. It's saying, hey, do this, right? There's the wildfire disaster advisory, which will come along in conjunction with our new fire hardening and defensible space disclosure, which we'll look at later on here. The fair housing, consumer privacy, those come with the contract automatically. But then we have our trust advisory, REO, statewide buyer and seller, short sale, and probate. So those are other advisories that we would add depending on the type of transaction, okay? And then, just like we said earlier, right? Here's where all the paragraphs are going to explain everything as referenced before. So like we're looking at paragraph 5. And if you recall up here, right? Paragraph 5 is referenced for purchase price. Paragraph 5 is referenced for initial deposit. Paragraph 5 is referenced for increased deposit, loan amount, additional financed amount, balance, credits, verification of cash, right? So it's now we see, well, what are we talking about in paragraph 5? Well, we'll chat about it. Additional terms affecting the price. The deposit already says it's got to go to escrow within 3 days. And then it's just going to break down and go through all the rest of the terms, like what happens in certain scenarios. Now, I was really planning on doing more of an overview today and not going line by line. So I'm not going to read everything word for word here, but I do want to kind of point out a few things that are different. Okay. Paragraph 5.3, retention of deposit. And it basically says if liquidated damages, paragraph 29 is initialed by all parties or incorporated in this agreement, this specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer removes all contingency and then cancels, or buyer removes contingencies and can't close and is served a demand to close and it has to get canceled, right? Buyer and seller advised to consult with a real estate attorney before adding any other clauses, specifying a remedy such as release or forfeiture of the deposit, okay, or making the deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfied the statutory liquidated damages. It takes a piece of the liquidated damages paragraph and puts it right here when it talks about the deposit. Okay. By the way, it also is basically saying that, you know, forcing a seller to pass or a buyer to pass through their deposit to like buy a extension of time or to make the deposit non-refundable, if they're not written properly, they may be in violation of California statutory law and would be invalid. Okay, so if you need to do that, you would want to have an attorney review what sort of language you're going to use to force the release or make a deposit non-refundable. Okay. All right. Let me see here. All cash offer, nothing new there really. Loan status. So here's another new one. 5C3, buyer's loan status. Buyer authorized seller and seller's authorized agent to contact the buyer's lender to determine the status of the buyer's loan, right? So in the past, or currently, I should say, many lenders will say, oh, I can't talk to you, listing agent or seller, because I don't have your permission. Well, guess what? Now we have permission right in the contract so that you can call the buyer's lender directly for status updates. Okay, so that is new. Let's see here. Something new as well. There currently exists in zip forms an FHA or VA repair request. They have their own addendum or request for lender required repairs. Well, they are eliminating that form, and now FHA or VA requests are to be handled on an RR. I suspect that most of you guys are using the RR for that currently, but now it's the only way to do it. Okay. All right. Balance, let's see, limits on credits. So this is in there now. I think it bears repeating though. Guys, remember, if you're a buyer asking for credits in lieu of repairs, make sure they don't exceed the actual amount of money that can be credited. Okay, this is in the contract currently. But this paragraph basically says if you ask for more money than there are lender costs that can be credited, you can't get that money back, right? Like if the lender's costs are 15K and you ask for 20, you don't just automatically get an additional $5,000 in cash or a reduction in the price, right? You have to create a new contract or that money just disappears. Okay, so be aware of what you're asking for. All right. Let's see, what else do we have? Verification of down payment, closing costs. We know that the default now is that they are attached to the agreement. Same thing with the pre-approval. Okay. I will reiterate this as well because I know it goes often unstated. Buyer stated financing. The seller is relying on the buyer's representation of the type of financing, including all cash, how much down, contingent or non-contingent, et cetera, et cetera. And it says here, seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell to buyer in reliance on buyer's specified financing. So they've added that sentence there. And it says buyer shall pursue the financing specified, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. This is different. In the past, it said the seller does not have to cooperate with the buyer if they want to go get a different type of loan. Now it says, it basically says that that's okay. You can write an offer as 20% and pursue FHA. You can do that, yes, but it does say seller has no obligation to cooperate with the buyer's efforts to obtain that financing. Okay. And it shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow. So if they switch to FHA and then there's a bunch of lender required repairs and the buyer won't do them and the seller won't do them, and now it causes you to be late because you wrote an offer as conventional, the seller potentially could retain the deposit or pursue the buyer for damages. Okay. So basically it says, yeah, you can pursue alternate financing, but you have to be prepared to close on what you wrote an offer for. Okay. And it actually says that buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse the buyer from the obligation to purchase the property and close as specified. There's no excuse there. Okay. All right. So we got all the way up to paragraph 7. We've done 4 of 16. I am going to stop today because we usually do an hour class. We'll pick this up again at our next contracts class. I will say also, guys and gals, CAR is going to be hosting basically little small tidbits of the contract. They're going to do classes that are not the 4-hour one that they should be offering for free. This doesn't roll out to December. Everything we talked about today, yeah, we're recording it, but you may forget all of this down the road. So I would recommend jumping into a few of these over time, right? And I'll have the recordings available to you as well. But it's significant enough that we should be really, paying attention. I haven't even retained all this stuff, right? Like those first few pages. Okay. Yeah, I kind of grasped that. There's a ton more that we haven't touched on that we'll get to. So just be prepared. So this is part 1. We'll do part 2 at the next contract class, basically 2 weeks from now. And that should take us through the majority of the offer. But we'll probably still have a part 3. And then I'll have some other videos to do down the road. Okay. So any questions while I got you here today?
Thank you, Nick. This is great.
Good. I'm
Appreciate it,
glad.
Nick.
You got it. All right.
Thank you, Nick.
You guys are all awesome.
You're
Love
the
you.
awesome one.
We'll
You
see
are awesome too.
Hey, thank you. All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Nick. That was great.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Okay, everybody. Have a great one. Be in touch soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
So, Miss Robert,